The storm on Kepler
Almost done, hang in there.
442b was not
It burns, but
natural.
I'm a Kendia.
Violet lightning tore across the black sky
Almost
in
done, hang in
patterns that
there.
made no
It
meteorological
burns, but I'm
sense,
a Kendia.
slamming into the jungle canopy with cracks that shook the ground and sent native creatures fleeing into burrows. Dr. Thomas Crow ran through the rain, his boots sinking into mud that glowed faintly with bioluminescent microorganisms, his breath loud and harsh inside his helmet. The emergency signal on his wrist display blinked with mechanical insistence. Unknown origin, non-human, rapidly failing. Thomas wasn't a soldier, not anymore. He'd left that life behind 18 years ago when his best friend Ryan Kellerman died in his arms, 4 minutes after Thomas received the call for medical assistance. 4 minutes that might as well have been 4 hours. 4 minutes of hesitation, of weighing tactical sense against one man's life, of making the wrong choice and living with it every day since. He'd promised himself then, never again would he be in a position where his choices could cost lives. He'd become a research scientist, buried himself in atmospheric data and weather patterns, chosen the safe path of observation over intervention. But when that signal appeared on his scanner 40 minutes ago, something inside him refused to ignore it. Maybe it was the memory of Ryan's face. Maybe it was exhaustion with 18 years of isolation. Maybe it was just the simple fact that someone needed help, and he was the only one close enough to respond. The Research Dome's director, Dr. Sarah Brennan, had tried to stop him. Thomas, the storm's getting worse. Whatever crashed out there is probably already dead. Don't risk yourself for a signal. He'd looked at her, this competent engineer who'd become as close to a friend as he had allowed anyone to get in nearly 2 decades, and said simply, "I'll be back in 2 hours." Now crashing through alien undergrowth while lightning turned the world purple-white, Thomas wondered if he'd lied to her. The clearing ahead burned with scattered debris, twisted metal that seemed to shift and writhe when he looked at it directly, shapes that hurt his eyes because they existed in geometries that shouldn't be possible in 3-dimensional space. At the center of it all lay a pod, not a ship, something smaller, an escape vehicle, cracked open like an egg, its contents spilling into the mud. And beside it, barely moving, was her. Thomas froze. She was tall, slender, her skin shimmering with a faint silver-blue light that pulsed unevenly like a failing heartbeat. One leg bent at an angle that made Thomas's medical training scream warning songs. Dark, luminous blood, actual bioluminescent blood, soaked into the alien soil beneath her, mixing with the rain to create pools of light. When Thomas took a step closer, his boots squelched in the mud. The sound was small, barely audible over the storm, but her eyes snapped open. They were wide, luminous, filled with raw, absolute terror. She looked at him, really looked, studied his environmental suit, his helmet, the medical pack on his back. Her alien features were difficult for Thomas to read, but the emotion was universal. Whatever hope she'd been clinging to vanished in that moment. Slowly, carefully, as if even the motion would bring death faster, she closed her eyes. Her hands, which had been clutching weakly at her injured leg, relaxed at her sides. She stopped fighting. She was surrendering. Thomas felt something crack inside his chest. "Oh," he whispered, his voice breaking. No, that's not what this is." He dropped to his knees immediately, holding both hands up even though she couldn't see him anymore. He moved slowly, deliberately, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or attack or simply die from the stress of human contact. His heart hammered as he activated his medical scanner. The device struggled, its readings jumping erratically, then slowly adjusted as it attempted to translate her physiology into terms a human medic could understand. The results made his stomach drop. Severe trauma, internal bleeding, shock setting in fast, multiple organ systems failing. She was dying, and not slowly. Thomas opened his medical pack with shaking hands. "Hey," he said softly, trying to keep his voice calm despite the fear crawling up his throat. "You don't get to quit yet. I crossed 3 miles of death forest to find you. At least be polite and stay alive." No response. Rain slid down his visor, blurring at his vision. He wiped it clear with one gloved hand and went to work on pure instinct in 18 years of training that his body remembered even if his soul had tried to forget. Coagulant foam first, the universal type designed for first contact scenarios, engineered to adapt to alien biochemistry. It hissed as it made contact with her glowing blood, turning from white to a strange purple color as it bonded with her circulatory system. Her body jerked once, a sharp intake of breath escaping her lips, but she didn't fight him. She thought he was finishing the job. Thomas felt that crack in his chest widen. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, knowing she probably couldn't understand him, but needing to say it anyway. "I'm here because someone put out a distress signal and I won't ignore that, not again." The scanner chimed. Stabilization partial. Her chest rose more evenly, the terrible rasping quality of her breathing smoothing into something less desperate. Her eyes opened again, just a fraction, confusion replacing the fear. Her translator crackled to life, a small device at her throat struggling to process his language. The voice that emerged was weak, distorted, but understandable. "You did not strike." Thomas let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. "Yeah, that would be rude." The translator struggled, processing. "Humans eliminate survivors." That one hurt. Thomas paused in his work, looking at her face, at the genuine belief in her dying eyes. "Sometimes," he admitted quietly, because honesty felt important in this moment, "but sometimes we also help strangers we don't understand on planets that want to kill us. Both things can be true." She studied his face, his hands, the patchwork medical gear that was mostly standard equipment held together by improvisation and stubbornness. Not a warrior, not a conqueror, just a man with a medical kit and a debt to a dead friend he could never repay. "Why?" she asked. Thomas thought of Ryan, thought of 18 years spent running from consequence, thought of the empty nights and the isolated research and the promise he'd made to himself that had slowly become a prison. "Because," he said, "someone once helped us when we were weak, and we didn't forget." A distant rumble rolled through the jungle. Not thunder this time, something mechanical, heavy. The scanner on Thomas's wrist lit up with new contacts, multiple energy signatures approaching fast. Her eyes widened again, panic flooding back. She tried to move and failed, pain flashing across her alien features in ways Thomas's human eyes could barely interpret, but his medic's instincts understood perfectly. "They are coming," she whispered through the translator. "My pursuers. Death squads." Thomas looked toward the tree line where his scanner showed the signatures converging. 8 contacts, military-grade equipment, moving with precision that spoke of training and lethal intent. "How long?" he asked. "Minutes, perhaps 5. Thomas swallowed hard. He wasn't armed for a firefight. His research outpost barely had power, let alone weapons. He was a scientist who'd spent 18 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. But looking at this wounded woman struggling to stay conscious, something old and fierce rose inside him. The part of him that had been a combat medic before he'd been a coward. The part that remembered what it felt like to stand for something bigger than survival. "Okay," he said, forcing calm into his voice that he absolutely did not feel. "Then we improvise." He carefully lifted her, surprised by how light she felt despite her height, and started moving toward the hills. Each step burned his muscles. The rain turned the ground treacherous. The jungle screamed around them with alien calls and the crash of pursuing drones cutting through undergrowth. She clutched his sleeve weakly. "If they capture me," she said, "they will burn your world for assisting." Thomas grunted as he adjusted his grip, his boots sliding on wet stone as he climbed. "Yeah," he replied, "they'll have to find it first." For the first time, despite the pain, despite the fear, the alien woman made a small, disbelieving sound that might have been laughter. "What is your name?" Thomas asked, partly to keep her conscious, partly because, if he was about to die helping her, he wanted to know who she was. The translator crackled. "My designation is Serena Vale, Strategic Navigator of the Lithara Union." "Thomas Crow," he said, "human, bad at following safe advice." "You should abandon me," Serena said, her voice getting weaker. "You would survive." Thomas didn't hesitate. "Not how we do things." They reached the cave just as the first energy blast scorched the clearing behind them. The explosion lit the jungle in harsh white light, shadows dancing like broken ghosts. Thomas threw himself forward, shielding Serena with his own body as debris rained down around them. The cave swallowed them in darkness, damp stone closing around them like a clenched fist. Inside, the air was cold and metallic. "Docile and bold," This wasn't a natural cave. Faint lines ran along the walls, ancient geometric patterns that seemed to shift when Thomas looked at them directly. The architecture predated anything in the archaeological records. Thomas gently lowered Serena onto the ground. Her breathing was shallow again. The effort of moving had cost her more than she wanted to admit. "They will scan," she said weakly. "They will find us." Thomas removed his helmet and wiped rain and sweat from his face. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading, now that he had time to realize what he'd just done. He'd interfered in an alien military operation, brought a fugitive to an American research colony, probably started an interstellar incident. Ryan would have called him an idiot. Ryan also would have done exactly the same thing. "Then we give them something better to look at," Thomas said, pulling a small device from his pack. Not a weapon, not even close, just a compact atmospheric regulator, the kind used to stabilize weather sensors in unstable conditions. Serena watched him with growing confusion. "What is that?" "Technically," Thomas said, already working, "a weather stabilizer. Practically a very angry box that hates being overworked." Outside, mechanical footsteps echoed closer. The hunters were precise, efficient, built to erase problems and leave no witnesses. Thomas could hear them coordinating through some kind of encrypted channel, their movements synchronized with military precision. He jammed wires together, rerouting the regulator's output into the cave's ancient circuitry. The walls hummed faintly in response, as if something half asleep was being reluctantly awakened. "You do not know this technology," Serena said, watching him work with a mix of horror and fascination. "Nope," Thomas agreed cheerfully, though his hands betrayed his fear with their trembling. "But I know systems. Everything talks if you stress it enough. And I've spent 18 years studying atmospheric patterns and power fluctuations. Same principles, different application." A drone hovered near the cave entrance, its scanning light slicing into the darkness like a blade. It swept once, twice, analyzing, calculating threat levels. Thomas slapped the regulator. Hard. The cave woke up. Energy surged through the stone, ancient systems flaring to life after millennia of dormancy. The drone's sensors overloaded instantly, its sophisticated alien technology completely unprepared for the electromagnetic pulse of a civilization that had built gates between stars when Serena's ancestors were still learning to make fire. The drone shrieked as its systems fried, spiraling backward before slamming into a tree and detonating in a ball of superheated plasma that left scorch marks on the jungle canopy. The jungle went quiet. Serena stared. "That was impossible." Thomas exhaled, his whole body shaking now. "Yeah, humans hear that a lot." His scanner lit up with new contacts. More drones, dozens of them. The death squad was regrouping, adapting, preparing for another assault. "We can't stay," Thomas said, "but I can slow them down." He worked quickly, creating false heat signatures across the jungle. Phantom movements, ghost signals bouncing in every direction. The drones split up, confused, chasing electronic phantoms through the undergrowth. Serena watched the display in genuine awe. "Our fleet struggles against such hunters." "Well," Thomas said, helping her sit up despite the pain it caused her, "we struggled against predators with bigger teeth and stronger claws once upon a time. Turns out brains beat strength if you're creative enough about it." They moved deeper into the cave system, emerging into a vast underground chamber that made Thomas stop and stare. At its center stood something enormous, a ring structure embedded in the floor, cracked and weathered, but still pulsing faintly with residual energy. Symbols covered every surface, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as Thomas watched. Serena's eyes went wide. "This is a gate." Thomas blinked. "Like teleportation?" "Like a road between stars," she whispered, her voice filled with something close to reverence. "These structures are older than recorded history, older than any current empire. We've found 17 of them across explored space. None were functional. All were abandoned because the technology was too unstable, too dangerous to activate." Thomas let out a breathy laugh. "Of course it is, because today wasn't strange enough." The gate flickered as the surge Thomas had triggered bled into its ancient systems. Power that had been dormant for eons struggled back toward consciousness. Circuits testing connections. Systems running diagnostic protocols written in languages no living species could read. Serena grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Thomas, if this activates, it will send a signal across known space. Every government, every military, every faction monitoring for gate activity will know exactly where we are. He met her gaze. Good. Let them hear us. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Thomas interrupted gently. You're trying to protect me. But Serena, if there's one thing I learned when my best friend died in my arms, it's that some things are worth the risk. Whatever you're running from, whatever you're protecting, it matters. I can see it in your eyes. So let's make sure they hear it. The drones burst into the chamber, weapons charging with high-pitched whines that made Thomas's teeth ache, energy weapons tracking, targeting systems locking onto human and alien biosignatures. Thomas stepped forward, positioning himself between the drones and the gate, holding nothing but a burned-out atmospheric regulator and the kind of stubborn human determination that had once convinced his species they could fly by strapping metal wings to their backs and jumping off cliffs. Come on, he muttered. Let's make history. But Serena moved beside him, not behind him, beside him, despite the pain, despite her injuries, despite every tactical and survival instinct screaming at her to hide. No, she said firmly, not your fight alone, our fight together. She reached into her suit, pulling out a data crystal that glowed with soft amber light. I didn't tell you everything, Thomas. I'm not just running from the death of squads. I'm running because I discovered something. A project called Erasure. A plan to commit genocide against 2.4 billion people of a species called the Valari. Peaceful, artists, philosophers. Marked for extermination because they refused to submit to Lithara authority. She held up the crystal. This contains proof, communication logs, strategic plans, execution orders, everything. But the data is corrupting. The crash damaged the storage matrix. I have maybe 36 hours before it's lost forever. Thomas understood immediately. You need to transmit it. The gate can amplify signals across the galaxy, Serena said. But I don't know if I can activate it. I've studied these structures my entire career. I'm what my people call a keeper of lost technologies. But theory and practice are very different things. Then we figure it out together, Thomas said. The drones fired. Thomas grabbed Serena and dove aside as energy blasts scorched the air where they'd been standing. The gate pulsed in response to the weapons fire, its ancient defensive systems recognizing threat patterns. Serena crawled toward the gate's central console, leaving a trail of luminous blood. Her hands trembled as she touched the symbols, her training flooding back despite the pain. It needs a genetic key, something the original builders used to prevent unauthorized access. What kind of genetic material? Thomas asked, providing covering fire by throwing chunks of rock at the drones to disrupt their targeting systems. Not effective, but chaotic enough to buy seconds. Serena looked at her bleeding leg, then at the gate, then at Thomas with an expression that said she was about to do something either brilliant or suicidal. Mine, she said. She pressed her hand against the central matrix, letting her luminous blood flow into channels carved into the ancient stone. The gate recognized something in her DNA, something that marked her as descendant of a species old enough, advanced enough, desperate enough to be worthy of using roads between stars. The gate roared to life behind them, light spilling outward like a newborn star going supernova. The drones fired wildly, their programming unable to cope with the electromagnetic chaos. Thomas shielded his eyes as the brightness became unbearable. The data crystal in Serena's other hand pulsed, syncing with the gate's transmission protocols. Information flooded outward through quantum channels, riding electromagnetic waves across light years, reaching every receiver in explored space. Evidence of Project Erasure. Undeniable, uncorruptible, public. The Valari were saved. But the gate's activation did something else, something neither Thomas nor Serena expected. It sent another kind of signal, not just data, a beacon, an announcement that said, here, now, something has changed. Across the galaxy, sensors flared, ancient networks whispered awake, governments scrambled to analyze what they were detecting. And in the darkness between stars, something impossibly old turned its attention toward Kepler 442b. The light swallowed everything. The drones, the cave, the universe itself seemed to fold inward for one eternal moment. When the brightness faded, Thomas and Serena were still alive. The drones hung motionless in midair, frozen in some kind of temporal stasis field the gate had generated as a defensive measure. Serena collapsed against the stone, her strength finally gone. But she was smiling. "The evidence," she whispered. "It's safe. The Valari are safe." Thomas knelt beside her, checking her vitals with shaking hands. Critical, but stable. She'd live. They both would. For now. "Serena," he said quietly, "what did we just do?" She looked at him with eyes that reflected the gate's fading light. "We changed everything." High above the planet, ships began dropping from hyperspace. Human ships, Lithara ships, others, all converging on the signal that had just announced itself to the galaxy. And somewhere deeper in the void, past the edge of mapped space, something ancient stirred from a sleep that had lasted eons. The Watcher had been patient. It had observed species rise and fall for 3 million years. But this was different. A dying alien, a human who chose compassion over survival. A gate activated by sacrifice instead of conquest. The Watcher focused its attention, waited, watched. The test had begun. The gate's transmission died 3 hours after Serena activated it. The ancient structure went dark, its purpose fulfilled, its energy spent. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was the held breath before a storm. Thomas watched the orbital displays from the research dome's command center, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the console. Dr. Sarah Brennan stood beside him, the energy systems engineer who'd helped them survive the first attack. She was pale, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. 14 ships just dropped from hyperspace, she said. Human configuration, Earth Defense Force signatures. Thomas exhaled slowly. They heard us. So did someone else. Sarah's fingers trembled as she pulled up the secondary scan. 23 contacts, Lithara military codes, Executor-class flagship leading them. In the medical bay 2 levels below, Serena sat upright despite the pain that still lanced through her body like lightning. The synthetic bone grafts in her leg were holding, but barely. Every movement reminded her that she was still broken, still mortal, still running out of time. But the evidence was safe, transmitted, received by 1,000 worlds. She had succeeded. Now came the price. The comm panel lit up with an incoming transmission, not a request, a demand. The voice that followed was crisp, professional, unmistakably military and American. "This is Captain Rachel Hendricks of the United Nations ship Iron Resolve. Dr. Thomas Crow, you are ordered to respond immediately and explain unauthorized activation of restricted alien technology." Thomas reached for the comm switch. Serena's voice cut through before he could touch it. "Don't." He turned. She was standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support, her luminous eyes sharp despite the exhaustion that shadowed her alien features. "This isn't your fight to answer for," Thomas said quietly. "You're right," Serena replied. "It's mine." She moved past him, each step deliberate, refusing to show weakness, even though Thomas could see the tremors in her legs. Sarah started to protest, but Thomas raised a hand. He'd learned in the cave, in the desperate hours of keeping Serena alive, that she was not someone who accepted being saved. She was someone who saved herself. You could only choose to stand beside her. Serena activated the comm panel. Her voice, when she spoke, carried none of the pain that racked her body. It carried only clarity and absolute conviction. "This is Strategic Navigator Serena Vale of the Lithara Union. I activated the gate, Doctor. Crow's only crime was keeping me alive long enough to do it." Silence answered her. Then carefully, Captain Hendricks responded. "Navigator Vale, you're claiming responsibility for an act that violated 7 interstellar treaties and triggered alerts across 16 sectors." "Yes," Serena said without hesitation. "I am." Another voice cut through, cold and sharp as a blade drawn in darkness. The Lithara frequency locked in simultaneously, the translation matrix crackling as it adjusted to the dual-species conversation. "Navigator Vale," Executor Kalen's voice was controlled fury barely leashed, each word enunciated with military precision. "You are hereby ordered to surrender yourself to Lithara custody for trial on charges of treason, theft of state intelligence, and sabotage of strategic operations." Failure to comply will result in the classification of your current location as hostile territory. Thomas moved beside Serena, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching. A gesture of solidarity, not control. He'd learned that much. Serena looked at him. Something passed between them in that glance. An understanding built not in words but in the hours they'd spent together. He had shown her that humans could choose compassion over cruelty. She was about to show him that aliens could choose truth over survival. Executor Kalen, Serena said, her voice steady as stone, I possess evidence of Project Erasure. I transmitted that evidence through the gate to every accessible receiver in explored space. By now, 17 major governments have confirmed receipt. The Valari genocide plan is no longer cliched. It's public record. The silence that followed felt like the air before lightning strikes. Thomas could almost hear Kalen's jaw tightening across the void. You had no authority, Kalen said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and cold. No, Serena agreed. I had conscience. Authority can be questioned. Evidence cannot. On the human channel, Captain Hendricks spoke quietly. Dr. Crow, we're detecting weapons charging on the Lethera flagship. I need to know if you're holding Navigator Vale against her will. Thomas almost laughed. The absurdity of it all, as if he could hold this woman who'd crawled across broken ground to activate an ancient gate, who'd sacrificed her own blood to save strangers she'd never met. Instead, he looked at Serena, and she nodded once. Captain, Thomas said, the only thing I'm holding is a medical kit. Navigator Vale is a guest under the protection of this research facility. She's free to leave whenever she chooses. And do you choose to leave, Navigator? Hendricks asked, directing the question past Thomas entirely. Serena straightened despite the agony it caused. I choose to stand trial, but not in secret, not in a Lethara military tribunal where evidence disappears and witnesses die in convenient accidents. I demand open trial, public record, galactic observers. Let the truth decide my fate, not political convenience. Executor Kalen's response came fast and hard. That is not an option. You will surrender within the hour or we will classify this colony as complicit in harboring a fugitive. Human lives will be lost. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. 18 years ago, he'd been a combat medic who failed to save his best friend because he'd hesitated 4 minutes too long, weighing tactical sense against one man's life. He'd spent nearly 2 decades avoiding situations where his choices could cost lives, burying himself in atmospheric research and weather patterns where the only casualties were data points. But standing beside Serena, hearing her refuse to hide despite the cost, something old and fierce woke inside him. The part that had been asleep since Ryan died. Executor, Thomas said, his voice carrying the weight of every year he'd spent trying to forget what it meant to stand for something. With respect, you're threatening an American research colony under Earth jurisdiction. That's not a compliance issue. That's an act of war. Dr. Crow, Captain Hendricks' voice sharpened. Stand down. You don't have the authority to make diplomatic statements. No one has the authority to threaten civilians, Thomas cut in. Not Lethara, not Earth Command, not anyone. That's not policy, that's principle. Sarah Brennan stared at him, genuinely shocked. Thomas Crow had spent 18 years following protocols, avoiding conflict, keeping his head down. The man speaking now sounded like someone who'd been asleep and just woken up angry and done with compromise. Serena reached out finally and rested her hand on his arm, not to stop him, to steady him, to let him know she understood what this cost. Thomas, she said quietly, you've done enough. This is my consequence to face. He looked at her, this alien woman who'd closed her eyes expecting death and opened them to find a stranger kneeling beside her with nothing but a medical kit and stubborn hope, who'd trusted him with her life and her mission and the weight of 2.4 billion lives she'd never met. No, he said, this is our consequence. You transmitted the truth. I kept you alive to do it. We chose this together. I'm not abandoning that choice now. The comm channels erupted. Executor Kalen demanded immediate compliance. Captain Hendricks ordered Thomas to cease unauthorized negotiations. Fleet commanders on both sides shouted over each other, weapons systems charging, shields powering up, the machinery of violence spinning faster and faster toward a point of no return. And then the gate woke up, not with the violent surge of activation, not with the desperate energy of Serena's blood-fueled transmission. This time it woke slowly, deliberately, like something ancient opening its eyes after a long sleep and deciding it had something to say. The walls of the research dome hummed. Dust lifted from surfaces in defiance of gravity. Every screen in the command center flickered, then filled with the same image, the geometric patterns of the gate, pulsing in rhythm with something vast and patient and impossibly old. Thomas felt it in his chest, a pressure that wasn't physical, a presence that wasn't quite sound, like standing near a massive bell that had just been struck, feeling the vibration in your bones before your ears registered the tone. Sarah grabbed his arm. "What is that?" Serena went rigid, her eyes wide with something close to awe and terror mixed together. "It's listening," she whispered. High above, in the Iron Resolve's bridge, Captain Rachel Hendricks stared at her tactical displays as they rewrote themselves. Not malfunction, not interference, simply information appearing where none had been before. Data flowing into her systems like water finding cracks in stone. Her weapons officer looked up, his young face pale. "Captain, I'm reading. I don't know what I'm reading. It's like the gate is inside our systems, but it's not hostile. It's not controlling anything. It's just there, observing." "Same here," her navigation specialist said. "It's accessing our sensor grids, but not manipulating them. More like reading over our shoulder." In the Lithera flagship, Executor Kalen experienced the same phenomenon. But where humans responded with curiosity and caution, his crew responded with trained precision and barely controlled alarm. "Defensive protocols," Kalen ordered. "Isolate all systems. Prepare to—" The gate spoke, not in words, in truth. Images flooded every screen, every neural interface, every conscious mind in orbit and on the surface. Not invasive, not violent, simply undeniable. Like watching the sun rise and knowing, regardless of your beliefs or desires, that morning has come. They saw civilizations, dozens of them. Species long dead, their worlds turned to dust, their names forgotten by time. Each had found a gate, each had stood at the same threshold humanity and the Lithara now faced. Each had been offered a choice. The images showed what followed those choices. Empires that chose domination saw their gates turn dark and lifeless. Technology that could have united stars instead became tools of conquest until the gates themselves rejected their users and went silent. Civilizations that chose isolation found their gates fading. The paths between stars closing one by one until they stood alone in an empty universe, calling into the void with no one left to answer. But there were others, rare, scattered across eons like stars in a dark sky. Species that chose differently, they chose to protect. The images showed a small, fragile species defending another from extinction, even though it cost them their most advanced ship and left them vulnerable to enemies who didn't hesitate to capitalize on that weakness. They showed a warrior culture laying down weapons to carry wounded enemies to safety through a battlefield still hot with plasma fire. They showed scientists sharing discoveries that could have been monopolized, traders opening routes that could have been restricted, ordinary people again and again across countless worlds choosing to help strangers at cost to themselves. And in every case, the gates responded. Not with power, not with technology, with connection. Paths opened between those species. Bridges that required cooperation to maintain. Roads that collapsed if used for conquest. The gates didn't reward the strong. They answered those who protected the weak. The vision focused, narrowed, became specific and immediate. It showed Serena, injured and dying, closing her eyes in surrender. It showed Thomas, kneeling beside her with hands that shook but did not strike. It showed the moment the gate first noticed them. Not when it activated, not when Serena's blood touched its core. Earlier, months earlier, 6 months earlier. The vision pulled back, showing Serena in her quarters on a Lithara strategic vessel, waking from dreams she didn't understand. Dreams of geometric patterns. Dreams of light that felt like a question waiting to be asked. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the pull of something vast below. She'd dismissed them as stress, as the weight of discovering Project Erasure pressing on her subconscious. She'd been wrong. The gate had been calling her, testing her, watching to see what she would choose when conscience and duty collided. The vision shifted again, showing Thomas in his research dome 18 years ago, the night after Ryan Kellerman died in his arms. showing him lying awake, staring at the ceiling, making a promise to himself that he would never again be in a position where his choices could cost lives, that he would isolate, study, avoid, choose safety over risk, observation over intervention. The gate had been watching him too, waiting for the moment when isolation would break, when the man who ran from consequence would choose to stand anyway, when fear of failure would matter less than the simple fact that someone needed help. The images faded. The presence lifted like morning fog burning away, but understanding remained, settling into the consciousness of everyone who'd witnessed it. In the iron resolve, Captain Hendricks sat back in her command chair, her breath shallow. "It chose them," she said quietly. "Not us, not the Lithera, them. Two people who made one choice to help each other, and the gate recognized something in that." Her tactical officer nodded slowly. "Ma'am, what do we do?" Hendricks looked at the planet below, at the research dome where a human doctor and an alien navigator stood together, and made a decision that would define her career and probably end it. "We protect them." On the Lithara flagship, Executor Kalen stared at the displays with something cold settling in his chest like ice water replacing blood. He'd served the Lithera Union for 32 years, risen through merit, through tactical brilliance, through absolute loyalty to the state. He'd executed orders that troubled him but never questioned them, because questioning orders was the first step toward chaos, and chaos was the enemy of civilized society. He'd told himself that following orders was honor. The gate had just shown him the difference between obedience and principle. His second-in-command, Commander Vryn, leaned close. The man's face was tight with barely suppressed rage. "Executor, the gate has revealed our strategic intelligence to hostile powers. If we withdraw now, we show weakness to every species watching. We must strike, demonstrate that Lithara authority cannot be defied." Kalen didn't answer immediately. He looked at the vision the gate had shown, at Serena Vale, who'd betrayed her oath to protect strangers, at the human who'd risked everything to keep her alive when tactical sense demanded he run, at the choice they'd made together. He looked at his own reflection in the dark screen before him, saw a man who'd spent 32 years becoming very good at following orders and very bad at remembering why those orders existed in the first place. 32 years of service, 17 commendations, 0 disciplinary actions, and one moment buried deep that he tried to forget. 20 years ago, a young officer named Kalen, standing in a burning colony while civilian refugees were trapped behind a wall of fire. Direct orders to withdraw before enemy reinforcements arrived. Tactical sense demanding retreat. The mission was reconnaissance, not rescue. Getting his squad killed for civilians who weren't Lithara, weren't allies, weren't strategically valuable made no sense. And Kalen choosing to stay anyway, choosing to save them, choosing to risk his life and his crew's lives for people whose names he'd never know. He'd been reprimanded, quietly, told never to let emotion override duty again, reminded that soldiers who think with their hearts instead of their heads get people killed. He'd obeyed. Spent 20 years learning to make the smart choice, the tactical choice, the choice that preserved Lithara interests above all else. Until this moment, watching an alien navigator throw away her career and her life to save 2.4 billion people she'd never met, Kalen had believed he'd made the right decision. "Commander Vryn," Kalen said slowly, "what do you see when you look at Navigator Vale's actions?" Vryn's face hardened like concrete setting. Treason, betrayal, weakness that will inspire other officers to question orders, a cancer that must be cut out. "I see someone who remembered what honor actually means," Kalen said, "before we corrupted it into obedience." Vryn went pale. "Executor, I must protest." "Protest noted." Kalen stood, his decision crystallizing, was a channel to the human fleet, and to Navigator Vale. On the surface, Serena felt her legs trembling, not from injury, from the weight of what the gate had revealed. It had chosen her 6 months ago, planted dreams, guided her path, known she would find Project Erasure, known she would run, known she would crash on this exact world where a man who'd spent 18 years running from consequence would finally stand still. "Thomas," she said quietly, "did you see?" "Yeah." His voice was rough with emotion he was trying to control. "It knew, the whole time it knew what we choose. We were being tested." "No," Thomas said. "We were being trusted." There's a difference. The comm panel chimed. Executor Kalen's image appeared, and for the first time since she'd known him, through briefings, through strategic sessions, through the cold, professional distance of military hierarchy, Serena saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Uncertainty, doubt, the look of a man questioning everything he'd built his life around. Navigator Vale, Kalen said, the gate has made its judgment clear. It does not recognize our claim to you. It recognizes your choice. Serena straightened despite the pain shooting through her leg. What are you saying, Executor? Kalen took a breath that looked like it cost him physically. I am saying that I have served the Lithera Union my entire adult life. I believed I served honor. The gate has shown me I serve policy masquerading as honor. The two are not the same thing. Vrin's voice cut through in the background, sharp with betrayal. Executor, this is madness. Our entire command structure depends on absolute authority. If you, Commander, stand down. Kalen's voice carried absolute command, the tone of a man who'd spent 3 decades leading soldiers and knew exactly how to make his authority felt. Then, softer, to Serena, you exposed a genocide plan. You sacrificed everything, your career, your freedom, probably your life, to protect a species we plan to erase. That is not treason. That is the highest form of loyalty to what the Lithera Union should be if we had not lost our way. Silence filled the comm channel. In the research dome, Sarah Brennan's hands were pressed to her mouth. Thomas felt something unknot in his chest that had been tight since Ryan died. I am withdrawing our claim, Kalen continued. Navigator Vale will face trial, as she requested. Public, observed, but not as a fugitive, as someone who reminded us that conscience outranks orders. Captain Hendrick's voice joined the channel, carrying the weight of Earth authority. Executor Kalen, the Earth Defense Force acknowledges your decision. We will ensure Navigator Vale's safety and fair treatment during proceedings. That won't be necessary, Serena said. Both commanders turned their attention to her. I don't need protection. I need accountability. I broke my oath. I stole classified intelligence. I activated forbidden technology. Those are facts. But I did them to prevent genocide. That is also a fact. Let both be judged in the open, where truth matters more than convenience. Thomas looked at her with something close to awe. Serena, no more hiding, she said firmly. No more running. If the gate chose us, it chose us to show there's another way. Not power protecting the weak, not the strong ruling the helpless. People choosing to stand together, accepting consequences, trusting truth over systems that exist to hide truth. She turned to face the comm panel directly, her voice steady and clear and absolutely certain. I formally request asylum with the Earth Defense Force pending trial. I will cooperate fully with investigators from both Earth and Lithara oversight committees. I will testify publicly about Project Erasure, and I will accept whatever judgment comes, as long as that judgment is made in the open, where lies cannot hide and truth cannot be buried. Captain Hendricks nodded slowly, respect evident in her bearing. Request granted, Navigator. Transport will arrive within the hour. Executor Kalen's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried something new. Not the cold, professional distance Serena had known. Something warmer, more human, ironically. The Lithara Union will send observers to your trial. Navigator Vale, you understand that if the tribunal finds against you, I'll face execution, Serena finished. I know. I accepted that risk the moment I stole the evidence. Some things matter more than survival. Then you are braver than I gave you credit for, Kalen said quietly, and perhaps wiser than those of us who've spent decades learning to compromise our principles for policy. The Union will watch closely, but it will watch fairly. You have my word. The transmission ended, the comm channels went silent. The gate's presence faded back to a gentle hum. Its point made, its purpose served for now. Sarah Brennan let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like an hour. Did that actually just happen? Did an alien executor just back down because of moral reasoning? No, Thomas said, watching Serena's face. He backed down because she showed him what he'd forgotten he used to be. Sometimes all it takes is one person choosing principle over safety to remind everyone else that honor used to mean something real. Serena turned to Thomas. The adrenaline that had kept her standing was fading fast, and the pain in her leg was becoming impossible to ignore. She swayed slightly, her vision blurring at the edges. Thomas caught her, his medic instincts faster than conscious thought. Okay, time to sit down before you fall down. Even heroes need to rest. Just need a moment, she said, her voice weaker now. Let me process that I just convinced an executor to choose conscience over orders. You just changed galactic politics, Thomas said, helping her toward a chair. You're allowed to be tired. That's the difference, Serena said softly as she finally let herself sit, between being saved and being supported. You understood which one I needed. High above, the Lithara fleet began its withdrawal, ships slipping into formation, weapons powering down, the machinery of war reversing course. It was not surrender. It was something far more complex. Acknowledgement that power without principle is just violence waiting for an excuse. The Earth Defense Fleet held position, protective but not aggressive, a wall, not a weapon. And in the research dome, Thomas helped Serena back to the medical bay, where she would rest for 1 hour before transport arrived to take her into custody. Not as a prisoner. As someone who'd reminded two species that the most dangerous thing you can do in a universe built on power is choose to stand for something powerless. The gate pulsed once more, faint and almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Satisfied, the trial lasted 6 days, not in a closed military tribunal, not in the shadows where inconvenient truths could be buried and awkward questions never asked. In the open, broadcast across 17 sectors, with observers from 23 species watching every moment, Serena Vale stood before the joint Earth-Lithara Tribunal and answered every question. She explained Project Erasure in detail that made Lithara officials shift uncomfortably in their seats. She showed evidence of 2.4 billion Valari marked for extermination, their crime nothing more than refusing to surrender sovereignty. She admitted to theft, to breaking her oath, to betraying her commission. She did not apologize for any of it. On the 6th day, the tribunal ruled, guilty of all charges, justified by conscience in the prevention of genocide. Sentence, time served with permanent exile from Lithara territory and mandatory cooperation with interspecies ethics, oversight for the remainder of her natural life. Not execution, not imprisonment. Accountability with acknowledgement that some laws deserve to be broken when they shield unconscionable acts. Executor Kalen, watching from his flagship in high orbit, closed his eyes briefly when the verdict was read. Commander Vryn had been arrested 3 days earlier for attempting mutiny during the withdrawal, rallying 17 junior officers to seize control and restore Lithara honor through strength. The mutiny lasted 40 minutes before Kalen's loyal crew put it down. 17 other officers faced courts-martial for complicity in Project Erasure. The Lithara Union itself faced sanctions and oversight from the Galactic Council for the first time in its 800-year history. One woman with broken legs and a stolen data crystal had brought an empire to its knees. Serena was standing in the observation ring of the orbital station where the trial had been held, looking out at the stars and thinking about consequences, when the dreams started again. Not like before. Not the gentle geometric patterns that had called her 6 months ago, pulling at her subconscious with questions she couldn't articulate. This was different, heavier, ancient, beyond comprehension, a presence that made the gate feel like a child's toy by comparison. She grabbed the railing as her vision doubled, the stars outside seeming to bend and stretch. Thomas was beside her instantly. He'd barely left her side since the trial began, serving as both medical advisor and the closest thing to family she had in this sector of space. Serena, his hand on her shoulder, steady and warm and real. What's wrong? Something's coming, she whispered. Something old, older than the gates, older than anything in my training. Across Earth, across every human colony and station scattered through explored space, the same thing happened. People stopped mid-conversation. Children paused in their play. Animals went silent and stared at the sky with instincts that predated language telling them something fundamental had changed. In a small town outside Houston, Texas, 8-year-old Bryn Aldridge woke from an afternoon nap and walked to her bedroom window. The sky looked normal, blue, clear. A few clouds drifting, but it felt wrong. Like something impossibly large was looking down at her, studying her with the kind of attention that made her skin prickle. "Mom," she called, "why do the stars feel different?" Her mother, Margaret Aldrich, came to the doorway and felt it too. That weight, that attention, that sense of being observed by something so vast that being noticed by it was almost crushing. "I don't know, sweetie." On the orbital station, alarms began to sound. Not emergency klaxons, something softer, stranger. Every sensor in human and Lithara space was registering an anomaly that shouldn't exist according to any known physics. Captain Rachel Hendricks' voice cut through the station's comm system, trying for calm and not quite achieving it. "All personnel, this is not a drill. We're detecting a spatial distortion that's, I don't even know how to describe this. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's not approaching. It's just here. Like it's always been here and we're only now noticing it." Thomas looked at Serena. Her luminous eyes were wide, but not with fear, with recognition. "You know what this is," he said. "The Watcher," Serena breathed. "The ancient texts mentioned it. An entity that observes civilizations when they cross certain thresholds. I thought it was mythology, legend, the kind of story keepers tell each other late at night to remind ourselves that there are things in the universe we don't understand." "What kind of thresholds?" "Moral ones." She turned to face him, and Thomas saw genuine awe in her face. "Species that gain the capacity to destroy or create on a galactic scale. It watches to see what they'll choose, whether they'll use power to build or burn." Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest like ice forming on still water. "And we just crossed that threshold. You stood against a superior force to protect a stranger," Serena said quietly. "I broke every law I was sworn to uphold to prevent genocide. The gate chose us and broadcast our choice to the galaxy. We didn't just cross the threshold, Thomas. We redrew it, showed everyone watching that there's another option besides domination or submission." The presence intensified, not threatening, not benevolent, simply absolute, like being observed by time itself, by the weight of 3 million years of accumulated wisdom and patience. And then it spoke, not with sound, with truth that bypassed ears and language, and filled every conscious mind with understanding. "You have been noticed." Across human space, billions of people heard those words in their minds and froze. On Earth, in orbital stations, in colony domes on distant worlds where humans had planted flags and built homes, humanity held its collective breath. The Watcher continued, its voice carrying the weight of eons. "I have observed for longer than your species has names for time. Counted civilizations as they rise and fall like seasons changing. Watched species reach the junction you now stand at, where power and conscience collide. You are the 48th to reach this threshold." Images flooded every screen, every neural interface, every conscious thought. Not invasive, undeniable. They saw species long dead. Civilizations that had stood where humanity stood now, facing choices that would define not just their generation, but every generation that followed. The first showed a species of brilliant strategists who accepted the Watcher's gift of perfect foresight. They never made mistakes, never suffered uncertainty. Within 3 generations, they stopped creating art because they knew exactly what it would look like before they started. Stopped asking questions because they already knew the answers. Within 10 generations, they stopped living in any meaningful sense because existence became simply following the script of a future they'd already seen. Perfect, safe, empty. The second showed warriors who accepted the gift of absolute strength. They conquered their sector of space in a decade, then turned on each other when there was nothing left to conquer, because violence was all they remembered how to be. Their empire lasted 2 centuries before tearing itself apart, monuments to their victories crumbling into dust while their children forgot why any of it had mattered. The third showed idealists who accepted the gift of harmony, all conflict removed, all disagreement smoothed away like stones worn down by water. They lasted 3 centuries before fading into comfortable stagnation, never growing because growth requires friction, never changing because change requires challenge, never becoming anything more than what they'd been offered. Species after species, gifts tailored to their nature, all accepted, all destroying what made those civilizations worth saving in the first place. The images showed every variant: perfect knowledge, unlimited resources, technological supremacy, immortality. Peace enforced by benevolent oversight. Each gift offered with genuine care, genuine desire to help these species that avoid the suffering that seemed to follow consciousness like a shadow. And each gift, accepted with gratitude and relief, becoming a cage more absolute than any prison built of stone and steel. 47 civilizations, the Watcher said. Each possessed the capacity for reason. Each possessed the capacity for destruction. You are the first to combine both with empathy sustained at scale. The images shifted again, showing humanity's worst moments with brutal clarity. Wars that killed billions, genocides that erased cultures, environmental destruction, nuclear fire, cruelty for the sake of cruelty or profit, or simply because hatred is easier than understanding. People across Earth wept, seeing their history laid bare. Sarah Brennan turned away from the screens, unable to watch. Thomas felt shame burn through him like acid. But the Watcher wasn't finished. It showed the other side. Humans sharing food during disasters when they barely had enough for themselves. Strangers pulling each other from rubble in cities they'd never visited. Scientists working together across borders despite their governments being enemies. Soldiers refusing orders to fire on civilians even when refusal meant court-martial. Doctors treating enemies because healing didn't recognize nationality. Teachers protecting students when bombs fell. Ordinary people making extraordinary choices to help others, again and again, even when it cost them everything. It showed Thomas kneeling beside Serena when every tactical instinct said to run. It showed Serena activating the gate, knowing it would expose her but saving the Valari anyway. It showed Executor Kalen choosing honor over authority. It showed Captain Hendricks protecting two people at risk of galactic war. It showed Bryn Aldridge asking a simple question about helping people. Potential is dangerous, the Watcher said. You possess both creative and destructive capacity beyond most species I have observed. You could build monuments that last millennia, or burn civilizations in a day. The choice is still forming. I offer you certainty. The offer materialized in every human mind simultaneously. Not words. Pure understanding. The Watcher would elevate humanity, grant technology that would cure every disease, provide energy that would eliminate scarcity, give knowledge that would let them explore the universe safely, extend lifespans to thousands of years, eliminate war, poverty, suffering, all the pain that seemed inherent to existence. All humanity had to do was accept the Watcher's guidance, surrender autonomy, let it make the difficult choices. Trust its wisdom accumulated over 3 million years of observation. Stop struggling against problems the Watcher could solve instantly. Peace, safety, progress, guaranteed. The cost, freedom to make mistakes, freedom to choose wrong, freedom to struggle and fail and hurt and grow through pain, freedom to be human in all its messy, complicated, beautiful, and terrible glory. On the orbital station, Serena felt the offer wash over her. She saw Thomas's face, saw him wrestling with the temptation. Around them, station personnel stood frozen, considering, calculating, weighing the promise of paradise against something harder to define, but feeling fundamental. Thomas, she said quietly, what are you thinking? He looked at her, this alien woman who'd become the closest thing to a friend he'd had in 18 years of isolation. I'm thinking about Ryan Kellerman, my friend who died because I hesitated 4 minutes. If the Watcher had been there, would it have saved him? Probably, Serena said honestly. Would I have learned anything from losing him? She understood immediately where he was going. No, you'd have been protected from consequence. You wouldn't have carried that guilt for 18 years. You wouldn't have isolated yourself trying to avoid ever feeling that pain again. You wouldn't have been here when I crashed because you'd never have needed to run from anything. I wouldn't have been the person who chose to help you, Thomas finished. I'd have been someone who never had to choose anything difficult. Someone who never failed because I never risked anything worth failing at. The comm system activated, not Captain Hendricks. A civilian channel patched through from Earth. A child's voice, tentative but clear. Excuse me, is anyone listening? The Watcher's presence shifted, attention focusing like a lens turning, vast and patient. Bryn Aldridge stood in her mother's kitchen in Texas, holding a comm tablet her mom had helped her connect to the open channels. Her 8-year-old face was serious in a way that children's faces shouldn't be, weighted with understanding beyond her years. My mom said I could ask a question, Bryn said, about the offer. Across 17 sectors, billions of beings, human and alien alike, waited for what a child would say. If we say yes, Bryn asked, her voice small but steady, do we still get to help people? Like if someone's hurt, can we choose to help them? Or will you just fix it for us? The watcher responded immediately, its presence gentle around the child, but absolute in its answer. You will not need to help. I will optimize all systems. Suffering will be eliminated. Choice will be unnecessary. Bryn was quiet for a long moment. Margaret Aldridge put her hand on her daughter's shoulder, proud and terrified in equal measure. But what if I want to help? Bryn asked carefully. What if helping is important, not just fixing? What if being there for someone when they're sad is the whole point, even if it makes me sad too? That desire will be removed, the watcher said. It causes pain. You will be happier without it. But I don't want to be happy if it means I can't help my friends when they're sad, Bryn said, her voice cracking slightly. That's the best part of being a person, being there for each other. My teacher says that's what makes us human. Silence filled the void. The watcher's presence shifted again, and Serena felt something she hadn't expected from an entity 3 million years old. Surprise. In all that time, apparently no one had framed it quite like that. No civilization had looked at the offer of paradise and asked whether paradise without choice was worth living in. Serena stepped forward to the comm panel. Her heart was hammering, but her voice came out steady. Watcher, I want to show you something. Thomas looked at her sharply. Serena, what are you doing? Answering the test, she said. Then to the watcher, you showed us 47 civilizations that accepted your offer. You told us they were elevated, protected, guided to better futures. But you didn't tell us the complete truth. The presence intensified like storm pressure dropping. I do not lie. You don't lie, Serena agreed, but you omit. You're not offering salvation. You're offering control. Those 47 civilizations didn't die. They didn't fail. They just stopped being themselves. They became extensions of you. Perfect, safe, empty. Images flooded Serena's mind, trying to overwhelm her with data, with proof of the Watcher's benevolence, with evidence of how much better those civilizations had become. But she'd spent years as a keeper of lost technologies. She knew how to read between the lines of ancient text. She knew what the histories didn't say because saying it would reveal the truth. I studied you, Serena said, her voice rising with conviction. 6 months ago, when the gate started calling me, I researched everything I could find about ancient entities. The text called you a guardian, a guide being, but they also mentioned something else that no one talks about. The civilizations of silence, 47 species that achieved perfect order and then stopped creating, stopped growing, stopped mattering to the universe. She pulled up data on her tablet, information she'd compiled during the trial preparations when she couldn't sleep and needed something to occupy her mind, broadcasted across every channel for everyone to see. Species 12 accepted your gift 800,000 years ago. They're still alive, still advanced, but they haven't produced new art in 400,000 years, haven't asked new questions, haven't changed in any meaningful way. They exist in perfect stasis, doing exactly what you optimize them to do forever. Species 29 accepted 300,000 years ago, same result. Perfect health, perfect harmony, perfect stagnation. They've been having the same philosophical debates for millennia because they already know all the answers. So there's nothing left to discover. Every single civilization that accepted your offer is technically alive. None of them are actually living. Thomas stared at her with something close to awe. You knew, this whole time you knew what it really was. I suspected, Serena said. The gate showed me enough to confirm it. The Watcher isn't evil. It genuinely believes it's helping. But it's a control system, a filter that removes chaos from the universe. And chaos, messy, painful, beautiful cases where life actually happens. The Watcher's presence pressed down, not hostile but overwhelming, like being at the bottom of an ocean. You would choose suffering over peace? Chaos over order? Risk over safety? You have seen what your species is capable of at its worst. You know the pain that comes from freedom to choose wrongly. Yes, Serena said without hesitation, because suffering teaches compassion. Chaos creates innovation. Risk makes choice meaningful. Take those away and you don't save us. You erase us. You turn us into museum pieces that look like civilizations, but have forgotten how to live. You speak for your species? The Watcher asked. No, Serena said firmly. I speak for myself, and so does she. She gestured to Bryn's image on the screen, and so does Thomas, and so does every person watching this. That's the point. We speak for ourselves, make our own choices, live with our own consequences. The moment you take that away, we stop being people and become whatever those 47 other species became. Shadows of what we were. Captain Hendrick's voice joined the channel from the Iron Resolve, carrying military authority but also something more personal. The Earth Defense Force stands with Navigator Vale. We refuse your offer. Another voice, then another. Human colonies across space, one by one, broadcasting their refusal. Texas, New York, the orbital stations around Jupiter, the mining colonies in the asteroid belt, the research outposts on worlds that didn't have names yet, just coordinates. Executor Kalen's voice cut through, firm despite everything that had happened. The Lithera Union acknowledges the wisdom in Navigator Vale's assessment. We also refuse. The Watcher's presence shifted, changed. For the first time in 3 million years of patient observation, it encountered something unexpected. Unity and refusal. Not because people were forced to agree, not because some authority commanded it, because they independently chose the same truth, that being human or Lithera or any conscious species meant accepting pain as the price of meaning. Every species I have tested across the eons, the Watcher said, its voice carrying something that might have been respect, accepted without question, gratitude, relief. The burden of choice is heavy. Most are eager to set it down. You are the first to see what they did not, the first to value struggle over comfort. But you, Serena Vale, keeper of lost technologies, strategic navigator who broke an empire to save strangers, I offer you something different. The presence focused entirely on Serena. Thomas reached for her, but she stepped forward alone, knowing this moment required her to stand without support. You possess the knowledge to understand what I am, the Watcher said. You have the courage to stand against powers greater than yourself. You have shown capacity for sacrifice beyond calculation. I offer you individual ascension. Become my partner, immortal, eternal. Shape galactic ethics for the next million years. Guide civilizations toward better choices. You would not lose yourself. You would become more than you ever imagined possible. Serena felt it. The offer, real, genuine. Not a trick or a trap. She could see what she would become. Not controlled, not erased, elevated to something beyond mortal limitation. She could prevent genocides before they started, guide species away from self-destruction, become a force for good on a scale beyond imagining. All she had to do was accept, say yes, transcend mortality and become something that mattered on cosmic scales instead of merely personal ones. Thomas watched her face, saw the temptation there, saw her weighing it, considering it with the same analytical mind that had made her a keeper of lost technologies. Serena. She looked at him. At this man who'd kept her alive when she closed her eyes expecting death, who'd stood beside her without trying to make her choices for her, who'd learned in the cave and the standoff and the trial that the highest form of respect is letting someone be who they are, even when you're terrified they'll make choices that hurt them. Thomas, she said quietly, what would you do? He almost laughed. The absurdity of it, her asking him for wisdom. I'm the worst person to ask. I spent 18 years avoiding choices because one bad choice cost me everything. And what did you learn from that? He met her eyes. That avoiding choice is just choosing slowly, and that the choices that cost you everything are usually the ones worth making. But Serena, this is immortality. This is power to actually save species. I can't tell you what to do with that. You just did, she said softly. You told me the choices that matter are the ones that cost everything. She turned back to the Watcher's presence. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the weight of what she was about to do, knowing it would cost her something vast and irreplaceable. I refuse, she said. The Watcher's surprise intensified like a star going nova. You would reject power to shape the galaxy toward good? You would choose mortality over eternal influence? You could prevent suffering on scales you cannot imagine. Yes, Serena said, her voice strengthening. Because the moment I become eternal, I stop being me. I'd spend 50,000 years making perfect decisions for people instead of 50 mortal years making messy choices with them. You said it yourself, you've been doing this for 3 million years. And in all that time, you never learned the one thing that actually matters. What is that? That imperfect people choosing to help each other is worth more than perfect systems protecting them. You saved 47 civilizations from suffering, but you also saved them from joy, from discovery, from the pride of solving their own problems. You turn them into children who never grow up because you're too good a parent to let them fail. She took a breath, feeling tears on her face, though she didn't remember starting to cry. I'd rather live 50 years making real choices than rule 50,000 years making perfect ones. Because perfect is just another word for finished. And I'm not finished yet. None of us are. That's the whole point. Silence. Then slowly the watcher's presence began to withdraw. Not in anger, in something else. Something that felt almost like satisfaction. You are the first to refuse individual transcendence, it said. The first to choose meaning over power. The first to understand that my offer, however well-intentioned, is another form of control. Endure then. Choose. Struggle. Fail. Succeed. Become what I cannot predict. And when you stand at the next threshold, and you will if you survive, remember that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not power. It is free will wielded by those who understand its cost. The presence faded. Not gone entirely, the watcher would still observe, still watch from whatever place outside space and time it occupied, but no longer offering, no longer interfering, just witnessing what humanity and their allies would become. The comm channels exploded with noise. Celebration, relief, confusion, arguments about whether they'd made the right choice. But Serena just stood there, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline that had carried her through the last hours draining away all at once, leaving her hollow. Thomas caught her before she fell, his grip steady and sure. Sit down before you fall down. Even heroes need to rest. Give me a second, she managed, her voice weak. I need to process that I just turned down immortality. You turned down a cage, Thomas said gently. Even a golden cage is still a cage. Captain Hendrix's voice cut through the celebration. Navigator Vale, Dr. Crow, you should know. The gate on Kepler 442b just activated again. They looked at the displays. The gate that had been dormant since Serena's transmission was pulsing, but not with the violent energy of before. Gentle, purposeful, like it was leaving a gift. We're reading it as information, Hendrix said, her science officers working frantically to analyze the data. Data structures we've never seen before. Complex, beautiful, like sheet music for physics. Serena pulled up the readings on a nearby console, her training as a keeper kicking in despite her exhaustion. Her eyes widened as she traced the mathematical patterns. It's a map, she breathed. Star paths, navigation routes, but not like hyperspace corridors. These are different. They require cooperation to function. Thomas leaned over her shoulder, trying to make sense of the alien mathematics. What do you mean, cooperation? If ships from multiple species travel them together, the paths stay open and stable. The journey becomes faster, safer, more efficient than anything we've achieved before. She traced the equations, her mind working through the implications. But if one species tries to use them for conquest, if the intent shifts from cooperation to domination, she looked up, wonder and understanding in her eyes. They collapse permanently. The route becomes impassable, locked against the species that violated trust. Thomas understood immediately. Roads that only work if you walk them together. The gate's final gift, Serena said. Not power, not technology in the traditional sense. Connection, but only for those who choose to cooperate. It's rewriting the rules of interstellar travel to favor working together. Over the next weeks, as analysis continued and test runs confirmed the gate's gift, the implications became clear. Species that work together could explore the galaxy faster than ever before, opening frontiers that had been unreachable. Species that fought would find themselves isolated, their aggressive ships bouncing off collapsed routes like birds hitting windows. The universe had just rewritten the fundamental economics of space travel to make cooperation profitable and conquest impractical. 6 months after Serena refused the Watcher's offer, the Interspecies Ethics Council met in a converted warehouse in Nevada. Not a gleaming tower in Geneva or New York or any capital city, not a prestigious location chosen for symbolic importance. A place that had been used to store mining equipment before Serena Vale, Doctor. Thomas Crow and 17 representatives from 9 species transformed it into something else. A place where ex-military officers, former researchers, and ordinary people who'd made extraordinary choices gathered to figure out what ethical cooperation actually looked like when you couldn't hide behind bureaucracy or let perfect become the enemy of good. Serena stood at the front of the room, her leg fully healed now, no longer limping. She'd refused a formal leadership position when the council was being organized, insisted on being first member instead of founder or director. Leadership, she'd argued, was what had gotten the Lithara Union comfortable with genocide. Better to be equals working together than a hierarchy waiting to calcify into authority that couldn't be questioned. Thomas sat in the second row, serving as human co-founder and medical ethics advisor. He still did research, still published papers on atmospheric patterns and weather systems. But he no longer isolated himself, no longer avoided situations where his choices mattered. Turned out once you stand beside someone who refuses godhood, regular human interaction feels manageable by comparison. Executor Kalin attended via hologram from a Lithara observation post at the edge of their territory. He'd been demoted 2 ranks, reassigned to oversee a small monitoring station, publicly reprimanded. He'd requested every bit of it, said he needed to remember what it felt like to serve principles instead of policy, to work for something instead of commanding it. Captain, now Admiral, Rachel Hendricks had been promoted despite her insubordination, or perhaps because of it. Earth Command had quietly decided that an officer willing to risk war for principle was exactly the kind of person they needed leading the diplomatic defense fleet. She attended every council meeting in person, treating it with the same seriousness as military briefings, often still in uniform. And sitting in the front row, brought in via a special educational program that let gifted students observe galactic governance, was Bryn Aldridge. Still 8 years old, though her 9th birthday was coming next month. Still asking questions that cut to the heart of complicated issues with the clarity that adults had learned to complicate away. The current discussion was about enforcement. How do you maintain ethical standards without becoming an authority that enforces conformity? How do you prevent the council itself from becoming what the Lithara Union had been, an organization so convinced of its righteousness that it justified anything? Bryn raised her hand. Serena called on her immediately. The council had learned that dismissing her questions because of her age was a good way to miss insights. Everyone else was too sophisticated to see. What if we don't enforce anything? Bryn suggested. What if we just show people what happens when they choose good and what happens when they don't? Like the gate did. It didn't force anyone, it just made cooperation work better than conquest. The room went quiet. 17 species representatives looked at each other. Executor Kalin leaned forward in his holographic projection. Admiral Hendricks smiled slightly. Out of the mouths of children, she murmured. She's right, Kalin said. We're trying to build systems of control when we should be building examples of principle. The gate didn't punish conquest. It simply made cooperation more rewarding. Natural consequences instead of imposed punishment. The discussion shifted, changed, became something more organic, less about rules and more about creating conditions where ethical choices were easier than unethical ones. After the meeting, Bryn found Serena in the warehouse's small garden, a space Serena had insisted on including. She said every place where people make hard choices should have somewhere green to rest their eyes, somewhere living to remind them what they're fighting for. Can I ask you something? Bryn said. Always, Serena replied, sitting on a bench beside a small fountain. The water was from Earth, the plants from 4 different worlds, a garden that required cooperation to exist. When you closed your eyes back when you were hurt, did you think you'd die? Serena looked at this child who'd helped save the galaxy by asking a simple question about helping people. Yes, I absolutely thought I'd die. What changed? I met someone who showed me that humans remember being weak, so they refuse to be cruel when they're strong. That one example taught me more than all my training ever did. Bryn considered that with the seriousness of someone 3 times her age. Is that why you said no to the Watcher? Because you wanted to stay someone who could learn instead of someone who already knew everything? Exactly that, Serena said. Perfect knowledge means you never grow. You never surprise yourself. You never discover something you didn't expect. I'd rather spend my whole life figuring things out than spend eternity having all the answers. Me too, Bryn said simply. She looked up at the sky visible through the warehouse's skylights. Do you think the Watcher's still watching? Probably, Serena said. But it's not testing anymore. It's just curious about what will become. What do you think will become? Serena smiled. I don't know, and that's the best part. Inside the warehouse, Thomas finished compiling the day's notes. The council had reviewed 17 cases of interspecies cooperation, 3 trade disputes, and 1 situation where 2 species had independently developed the same technology and were arguing about patent rights. Nothing world-shaking, nothing that would make historical archives. Just the ordinary work of people trying to be good to each other across the vast distances of space. Children from 14 different species were playing in the common area. The future being built not through treaties or systems, but through ordinary moments of connection. A human child teaching a Lithara youngling how to throw a ball. An alien from a species Thomas couldn't name showing a group of kids how to make music with frequencies humans couldn't hear, but could feel in their bones. He thought about Ryan Kellerman, about 18 years of guilt and isolation, about the moment he chose to help a dying stranger instead of staying safe in his dome. Best choice he'd ever made. Not because it led to galactic change, not because it made him important or powerful, because it led to this. Standing in a room full of people trying to figure out how to be good to each other. Messy, imperfect, real. He looked out the window at Serena and Bryn talking in the garden. 2 people separated by species and age and experience, connected by the simple choice to care about what happened to each other. Outside the warehouse, a newsfeed played on someone's tablet. The Valari homeworld was celebrating its first Remembrance Day, honoring the 2.4 billion lives that would have been lost if one strategic navigator hadn't chosen conscience over orders. The broadcast showed Valari families singing together at dawn, their tradition that the Lithara had planned to silence forever. Lithara's new government had dissolved Project Erasure entirely. 17 officials faced trial. Executor Kalen testified against them, his voice steady when he said, I followed orders. Navigator Vale followed truth. History will remember which mattered more. The first cooperative star path had opened 2 weeks ago. A human cargo ship and a Lithara medical vessel traveled it together, proving the Gates gift worked exactly as promised. Alone, neither could have made the journey. Together, they crossed in half the time, their ship's systems synchronizing in ways that surprised both crews. 7 more species had requested permission to test the routes. Early reports suggested that ships from 3 or more species could access paths that 2 species partnerships couldn't, as if the Gates rewarded deeper cooperation with broader access to the galaxy. Thomas glanced at his comm display, a message from Admiral Hendricks. Ryan would be proud of who you became. He looked at Serena, who was laughing at something Bryn said. This alien woman who'd closed her eyes expecting death and opened them to find a stranger who refused to let her die alone. Yeah, Thomas murmured to himself, I think he would. Serena caught his eye across the garden. No words needed, just understanding between 2 people who'd learned that the bravest thing you can do isn't refuse death. It's choose life, messy, uncertain, mortal life, with all its risks and all its beauty and all the pain that makes joy meaningful by comparison. And somewhere in the vast dark between stars, the Watcher observed and understood at last what 3 million years of accumulated wisdom had somehow missed. That the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't chaos. It's free people who've learned that kindness is a choice and choose it anyway. The future built not on power or systems or perfect order, but on the decision made again and again by ordinary people to help each other despite the cost. That, the Watcher thought with something that might have been the closest thing to satisfaction an entity could feel, is worth watching.